You're not my dad!
What up, Hope Biscuits? It's your girl Skitten, back at it again. So here we are at the beginning of August, which means we are only a month away from the beginning of September, which means we are only about 3 months away from Halloween, okay? Which means it is time to start planning your Halloween outfit if you have not already done so. Now, I always have a plethora of ideas for what I would like to wear for Halloween, and the problem that I have is narrowing them down, and also being actually willing to put in the effort to put the outfits together. Last year was really cool. I was fucking, oh my God, what is his name? The black guy in Bleach, the blind black guy in Bleach. I was a gender bent version of him. Another year I was Yoruichi. I like to do things, okay? I like to be like Storm and stuff like that. Like, I've done all of it. This year, I'm thinking I'm going to be, what's her name? Misa Amane from Death Note. That's what I'm thinking. And I'm going to do the blonde braids. And I basically have her entire outfit in my house already. It's a part of my wardrobe. Not that I wear it on like a daily because I don't fucking leave the house anymore. But it used to be something that I would like wear to work when I like was working nights, or like when I worked at a nightclub, or it was like something I would wear out when I was going out to a nightclub. So I'm ready, y'all. I just have to make sure I plan my like hair appointment accordingly, because my girl gets booked up. She gets booked so fast, and I need to make sure that my hair is dead. You feel me? Y'all feel me? Y'all feel me? Anti-Hoosins, today we are here to watch some overly sarcastic productions. So this video is called History Hijinks. Hijinks? Okay. History Hijinks, Rome's Crisis of the 3rd Century. I'm not going to hold you here in the intro any longer. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.
When discussing the history of Rome, it's only natural to come across a handful of points at which things seem to go very wrong. War here, plague there, civil war over here, another general marches his army on Rome, and after a certain point it doesn't even register. But these are all fairly momentary crises. A bad time, to be sure, but ultimately a self-contained catastrophe. Yet there is one truly abysmal chapter in Roman history that takes the cake. A quintuple barrel calamity for the ages. And no, I'm not talking about the Byzantines because I am not looking to cry today. I'm talking about the crisis of the 3rd century, which, by every reasonable prediction, should have destroyed everything. Fully everything. Yet, in a classic twist of Roman irony, the causes of this crisis and even a few of its symptoms would become the strategies used by Roman emperors to end the crisis and even keep Rome going for centuries to come. So, to figure out how the hell that's possible, let's do some history. The Roman Empire entered the 200s AD in an iffy state. The golden age of the last century was losing some of its shine thanks to a succession of truly garbage emperors, starting with Commodus the gladiator tyrant and not getting much better, like the guy who held a parade for his favorite rock and put his barber in charge of Rome's food supply. But beyond the scandalous hedonism of these emperors lay far more dangerous habits, like how Alexander Severus bought the loyalty of larger and larger armies by ballooning their pay. To afford this, he debased the currency by mixing the gold and silver with plebby dork metals, which tanked their value. And far from actually protecting Rome, this dynamic just gave the army leverage. In the old Augustan days, legions...
Real quick, that said A. Severus, and I was like, oh, Albus Severus? You mean the worst name in the history of names for children? Huh, but no, that's not who he's talking about. Obvi.
Far from actually protecting Rome, this dynamic just gave the army leverage. In the old Augustan days, legions served at the pleasure of the emperor, but now the emperor was just some guy who wore purple, and if Commodus could get strangled to death in a bath by his wrestling buddy, the bar for intimidating, puppeting, or just replacing an emperor was like 5 Praetorian guards. But then whomst to replace him with? Why, one of the generals, of course. And this was the same basic trick that Sulla and Caesar had pulled, but it saved the legwork of marching an army on Rome. Efficiency. So in the 50 years since the first guy got axed, over 20 such barracks emperors took their brief turn at the top. These guys weren't the most legitimate, since they conspicuously weren't the children or legal heirs of the previous emperor, but hey, you're the emperor! Never mind that another general 2 provinces over is taking notes on how you got to that point, you'll be fine! For a few months. All it took was some general beating up some Goths for their soldiers to say, "Great job, you should be the emperor," and then they get ideas, and suddenly there's a mini civil war to sort out.
Yeah.
And all this squabbling left the door wide open for Rome's rivals beyond the frontier to come right on in. Which frontier, you may ask? Good question. All of them. In the good old days, Germania was the primary ouch zone, but now the entire north was subject to incursions, from the Rhine all the way across the Danube, with fun new friends like Franks, Marcomanni, Goths, and plenty others. Some of these migrations were simply people looking for new lands to settle, while others were significantly more forceful. Terrifyingly, they also sailed down the Atlantic coast and into the eastern seas, striking as far as Athens in 267. The Roman army was good, but it wasn't that good. When an emperor focused on one area, another was left wide open, but when the emperor tried to delegate, he might find his trusty generals scheming for that big promotion. Meanwhile, the eastern frontier was also a nightmare. The Parthians had been a sore spot for Rome since Moneybags Crassus was defeated and taxidermied with gold back in 53 BC, but Parthia rarely went on the offensive. They were just hard to conquer, so all of Rome's failed campaigns were essentially self-inflicted. However, the newly formed Sassanid Persian Empire, which took their place in the 220s, was far better organized and much more of an outward threat. In the 250s, King Shapur I pushed into Armenia, Roman Mesopotamia, and briefly into the Levant. The Sassanid menace would become a running theme for the next few centuries, but it came out of the gate real fast in the mid-200s. In 260, they captured Emperor Valerian in battle, whereafter the king used him as a footstool, as if being the emperor wasn't bad enough already. But let's not limit our sample size. It was miserable to be any kind of Roman nowadays. We've got coins getting debased throughout the century to bribe the army, trade routes constantly disrupted by war, and entire regions being destroyed by invasions and counterattacks. Plus, a plague in the 250s killed thousands a day in Rome and whittled cities like Alexandria down to half, which in turn drastically reduced the labor force available to farm and
the Cyprian Plague, 249 to 262, and surprisingly coincides with the deepest period of turmoil in the century, with the economy plummeting and basic food/goods being out of reach for most Romans. Hashtag get vaccinated.
And fight, resulting in widespread food and soldier shortages. As if the actual wars weren't enough of a problem, piracy within the empire was rampant, so cities and provinces spent what little resources they had on defensive walls and small forts along major roads. All of this made clear that the society enjoyed during the Pax Romana was long gone, as it required the stability of strong government and a strong military, both of which were fully absent here in the 200s. Functions of government were carried out primarily by the army, who were only accountable to their very stabbable general. Luckily, when Rome worked, it worked, so if those political and military foundations could be patched up, at least on a local level, things could be alright. Now, believe it or not, the first 3 decades of the crisis were actually rather straightforward and even a bit tame compared to what went down after 260. Valerian being captured by Persia left Rome to his son and co-emperor Gallienus. Faced with the problem of everything everywhere all of the time, he was happy to delegate the Rhineland frontier to Postumus, a general and governor of Roman Germania. Naturally, it took all of 5 minutes for Postumus to be acclaimed as emperor, but not for all of Rome, just the western provinces.
Just the part
Gallienus couldn't really do anything about this, so Postumus had free reign to form a quasi-independent state in the west that stretched from Britannia through Gaul and Germania and down into Hispania. He created parallel Roman institutions like the Senate and consuls, and had no intention of causing trouble with the rest of Rome. He just wanted his slice, and he was able to defend it fairly well. Meanwhile, a strikingly similar story plays out on the other end of the empire, where Prince Odenathus of Palmyra fought back against King Shapur and began acting independently of the new emperor Gallienus. Roman trusted Odenathus with defense of the east and granted him governorship of the provinces of Cilicia and Syria down to Arabia. With only the eastern front to worry about, Odenathus held off the Sassanids until his assassination in 267, when his widow Zenobia became the de facto ruler of Palmyra and governor of all those provinces. Like in the west, this Palmyrene territory was essentially an independent state allied to Rome rather than provinces within it. This Palmyrene territory was essentially
Postumus was assassinated in 269, and Hispania and southern Gaul jumped ship, leaving only half of the Gallic Empire left. Well, that fucking sucks. Okay.
An independent state allied to Rome rather than provinces within it, and Rome was too occupied to really complain until 270, when Zenobia took advantage of a couple quick emperor deaths to annex Egypt and Galatia and proclaim her son as Imperator Caesar Augustus,
do what
which
you
we
gotta
can
do.
now fairly categorize as open revolt. Even then, the new emperor only cared that Egyptian grain exports stayed on schedule. unbelievable. And it's painfully telling that he could see part of his empire in a state of active rebellion and still think, I'll double back to that one later. I have more immediate problems.
We'll get
Plus,
around to
half
it,
of
you know.
Egypt was in favor of their annexation. It seems weird, but you can see why. The Palmyrene Empire and the Gallic Empire were smaller, more nimble, more stable, and slightly less susceptible to upstart barracks emperors.
Each sub-empire had only one frontier to manage, plus a smaller state made travel times quicker for both intelligence and armies. Okay, both Posthumus and Odenathus were assassinated by their troops, but their states were resilient enough to continue on in their absence.
This felt good to know that the person in charge was only one province over rather than halfway across the sea and probably in the process of getting murdered by his own guards. Really, the actions of Posthumus and Zenobia showed that they did work in the interest of Rome, just their corner of Rome,
just separate,
independently, and with the power of an emperor. Both states paid consistent homage to Rome, and despite how bad it looks on a map, were far less of a problem for the emperor than his own usurping generals, and even arguably a help, as they each removed an entire front from the emperor's to-do list. And this wildly set the stage for their later conquest, as the emperor Aurelian was free to focus the first few years of his reign squarely on fighting rival usurpers and barbarians along the Danube and, in Italy. In 271, he drove the Alemanni tribe out of the peninsula and built a new system of walls around Rome. He also organized a retreat from the always slightly untenable province of Dacia, making the much more defensible Danube River the consistent imperial border. With the northern front temporarily settled, he turned east, defeating Zenobia and reconquering the Palmyrene territories by the end of 273, and then the next year he schlepped west to reincorporate the Gallic state. To the empire's collective astonishment, Aurelian had reunified Rome under the singular authority of the emperor in just a few years, and was granted the title of Restitutor Orbis. No small praise.
Cute.
With the world restored, he turned his focus to reform of the state, but we're not out of the woods yet because Aurelian got murdered by his own troops.
I was gonna
in the
say.
decade
So he got murdered, didn't he? Right? Yeah. It's like fucking Game of Thrones. Every time someone's about to make positive change or negative change or any kind of change,
following, things were definitely better, but still kind of crap, with uncomfortably squishy emperors, a non-functioning economy, and more Frankish invasions in the 470s. But more people presented a new opportunity, and Rome essentially employed them in the reconstruction of devastated cities and farmland in exchange for letting them stay. This practice becomes quite a big deal in later centuries. So in the 250s and 60s, the empire spiraled out of control, and the 270s saw big progress, but the 280s and 90s are when Roman authority finally came back, during the reign and reforms of Diocletian. After his acclamation as emperor in 284, he issued more stable currency, firmly separated military and civil leadership to stop the army muscling in on the state, and moved the seat of government north to Mediolanum, where he could better oversee the front. Further, he delegated regional authority to his most capable officers and made his general Maximian co-emperor in 286. Two emperors wasn't a new idea, but by placing Maximian in charge of the west and Diocletian taking the east, this arrangement looked awfully similar to the business with Gaul and Palmyra, except this time it was intentional and formalized by intermarrying the families, which also created a line of legitimate succession. In 293, he expanded this setup by adding two junior co-emperors known as Caesars to support the two senior Augusti. This tetrarchy kept Diocletian firmly at the top, but each emperor had regional autonomy. By recognizing that Rome tended to split along geographic fault lines, Diocletian's diet federalism turned a perennial problem into a stabilizing strength. He also snuffed the threat of civil wars by cutting all the provinces in half, so each of the 100 governors had a clearer responsibility and less power to stand up against his local tetrarch. He also grouped these new small provinces into 12 regional dioceses to really layer the strata onto government. So in an insanely trolly twist of fate, the Gallic and Palmyrene breakaway empires were a trial run of what Diocletian would make official policy. Rome was too fragile for one emperor, so take it in parts. It was no Pax Romana, and even the tetrarchy would be temporary, but it was enough. Diocletian's reforms made a difference where they counted and brought Rome out of the crisis on a much more stable footing than they ever could have hoped for 2 decades earlier. I think people get excited about Rome for the wrong reasons. Rome conquered this, they conquered that. Those are all whatever. What's impressive are the moments when Rome stares into the pale face of death and tells him to wait his goddamn turn.
Back the fuck up!
Because no civilization could veto their own demise quite like Rome, and there's no greater refusal than the crisis of the 3rd century. To suffer 5 chaotic decades, but then learn from chaos itself to adapt the empire and come out on top. Rome would die, but not yet.
What do we say to the something of death? Not today. I really liked that breakdown. You could go so in depth with Roman history. It's just so freaking fascinating. But Rome really did just have a tendency to come out the other side, like changed and you know, like I was gonna say different, but that's the same word. Like changed, but still strong. You know what I mean? And there were just like little cracks here and there that would eventually bring the whole thing crashing down. But like they did a good job, you know, taping it up first. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to leave your reaction requests or recommendations down in the comments below. And other than that, peace out, Hope Biscuits. It's Skittin' Lit.